Success isn't just about what you achieve. It's about living a life that reflects your values and priorities. Welcome to Engineer Your Success, the podcast that helps you lead with intention and live fulfilled.
Welcome to the Engineer Your Success podcast. My name is Dr. James Bryant, your host for the show. I want to talk today about one thing that I've learned working with leaders across engineering and industries that support engineering. And that is, no matter where you look, no matter who I talk to, there is a growing talent shortage. From design firms to construction sites to public agencies, organizations are struggling to attract and develop the next generation. Today, we'll give some real insight as we talk about surveying. I'm joined by Dustin Gardner, a fourth-generation surveyor and industry leader who is helping to rebuild the pipeline for a profession that's at a crossroads. Dustin, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
How would you describe the current state of surveying as a profession?
I think the best way to describe it is aging out. So the numbers, and these numbers were from a couple of years ago, but the average license holder in land surveying was in their late 50s. So we're probably looking now, if those numbers kept trending, they're probably early 60s. And we're fixing to lose the better part of half of our licensed professionals here in the next couple of years. Pretty desperate to get some of those seats filled because it's an old profession and still very much necessary. Even as technology grows, there's a lot of information to process that takes in a lot of factors. So we want to try and refill those seats while we still have the mentorship capability to train the next group.
And so while many in our audience have a civil engineering background, there may be some mechanical engineers, computer scientists that are like, what are they talking about? Is this a company that sends out questionnaires? So let's talk a little bit about what is surveying.
So there's a huge umbrella. Surveying can be, there's some firms that will only resolve boundary. So that usually is, mom and pop boundary lines. Where's my property at? There's some firms that will only do topographic surveys. So they'll go out and they'll make a map of the ground. And so we want to see, every 10, 15 feet, what is that ground doing? What does it look like? And so we can deliver these 3D surfaces to the civil engineers, hopefully complete with no holes in them. I've heard about that one. And then they can use that to design their utilities, their buildings. But it goes all over. We do, part of it is ALTA surveys, which are American Land and Title Association surveys. And those are usually for the banks and the lawyers. And that's showing, if I'm going to buy this big business property, how many square feet, how big is my building, where are the utilities, what are the easements? So surveying's been described as a quasi-judicial profession. And so while we are not authorized to practice law, we still have to understand a great deal of law. And that really helps us form our decisions when we're trying to report back to a client, hey, this is what your property's doing. This is what it looks like. This part of it's really ugly. You should probably go find legal counsel. So things like that. So there's a lot that goes into it. And the longer that I'm in this profession and the more that I learn, the more I realize I have no idea, what there's just so much to learn. And every time you learn something more, it introduces 3 or 4 new steps. And you're like, so.
What led you to choose surveying?
So I grew up in the profession, so to speak. A lot of kids joke that their dad used to yell at them for not holding the flashlight in the right spot, and mine yelled at me because the rod wasn't level. So that's how I grew up. I actually started out when I went to the University of Nebraska-Lincoln, and I started out in their civil program because that was my grandpa's dual. He was a civil engineer and a surveyor, as was my great-grandpa before him. And so that's what I went into, and I loved it. I loved the classes. I got all the way up to statics, and then I started doing internships and sitting at a desk all day. And the best part of the civil engineering internship was getting to go out into the field and check stuff or helping the surveyors. I love being outside, and kind of came to a crossroads there where it's like, well, maybe the civil part's not for me. And I ended up switching into criminal justice. and I was going to go do law enforcement, graduated, and came back home. And the law enforcement applications are notoriously long. They're a couple months. So in the meantime, I was looking for a job, and my stepdad's been a career party chief, and he's like, "Well, why don't you come work here? You know, they use the same instruments that surveyors use for crime scenes and accidents for court cases. And so why don't you come learn how to do stuff?" And it took all of like 2 or 3 months to realize, hey, I'm home on the weekends and, in the evenings, holidays. You still get shot at once in a while if you're in somebody's property and they don't know better. That's the running joke. But aside from that, it's like, I'm loving what I'm doing. I still get to flex that math muscle and problem solving muscle that drew me to civil engineering. But, I still get to do some of the history stuff. I still get to be outside. So it was the perfect balance of what I was looking for.
What would you say are some misconceptions that people have about what surveyors do?
So one of the big ones that we'll get clients and they'll say, "Hey, I need you to stake, my east property line. You only have to do one line, right? So it should be a quarter the price of normal and way quicker." And it's like, well, it's not quite how that works. I still have to survey your whole property. And so it's still going to be the same price. We can still stake the one side, but we have to know where everything is. You have to take into account all of the information. And coupled with that is, they'll see us come out into the field and we'll be out there for an hour and a half, maybe 2 hours, find all their corners and go, "Okay, we're done." Stake their line, and they'll go, "Well, how is it, how did it cost so much and you're only out here for an hour?" And what they don't see is the day or 2 days before that of going to the courthouse and pulling maps, and plotting those maps, and then you're taking into all that account and calculating where the corners should be, and then bringing the information back. Once the field crew comes back, then the real work comes in because it can look fantastic in AutoCAD. And then the crew goes and finds stuff in the field, and you're like, "Oh boy, none of this matches." So it'll take us a couple days, and then even once that's done, and we file the record of survey or subdivision plat or whatever it is, once I stamp that, I've bought liability for the rest of my life. So I could be cutting the cake at my retirement party and get sued for the first job I ever did. And so it's one of those where there's so much behind the scenes work and so much that I'm going to keep this job for the rest of my life, and we really haven't. One of the common complaints in surveying is it's like, man, we've been doing the same. It's this survey's been $1,500 since 2000. We haven't really upped the prices on it. So, we're not rising with inflation, but you're buying that liability and that work still for pretty cheap price comparatively. But yeah, there's a lot of behind the scenes work and, tailing into that quasi judicial stuff going through the courthouses, and there's a lot of information out there. So, and you have to be right when you get into this. People have gone to war over boundary lines, so you have to be right.
Leadership comes with high expectations, too many responsibilities, too little time, and the constant pressure to keep up. If you're feeling stretched thin, you're not alone. At Engineer Your Success, we help leaders take back control so that they can lead with confidence, delegate effectively, and stop running on empty. You don't have to choose between success and sanity. Let's build a leadership plan that works for you. Visit engineeryoursuccessnow.com today, because thriving isn't just for others, it's for you. What are some steps that the industry can take to make surveying an acceptable opportunity or an interesting, engaging opportunity for someone looking at their next step?
So we've been going lately, and in my company, the guy who hired me, his name's Trent Keenan. He's been, on the forefront of this, and so that's how I got in touch with him, was doing these outreach events. But going to schools, especially middle school, junior high, high school, and kind of explaining what we do every day, holding some labs, bring in some equipment and show them, what we do. And the kids absolutely go nuts when you break out the drone, because a portion of this is, the orthometric stuff or LiDAR in many cases. And they've been doing some incredible things with LiDAR. I don't know if you follow, or if you're a Disney Plus member, but they have a couple of documentaries where they're going and flying the Amazon rainforest right now with LiDAR and pulling away the trees so that they can find all of these lost cities. And then once you've found that, they send people who use our equipment on the ground, and they go and they'll scan it and locate everything. And there's some really incredible corners too. So if you're like, man, I don't want to be on a construction site the rest of my life, there's plenty of other places to go.
Yeah, I think you've now found will have me looking for the next thing that I'm going to watch over the weekend, being able to look at the rainforest.
But yeah, no, it's incredible. And even being in the survey profession for 7 years, I just learned that that was something that we do or could do, So, but yeah, getting into these schools, because it feels like this past generation, the civils and the professional side, they got in with the universities and got settled in, and that has a huge following. I mean, the engineering are huge, and most of it, I know it was huge in Lincoln. The only one that was larger than the engineering college was the business college. So they're huge colleges, and for whatever reason, the surveyors didn't want to latch on to that. And that's one of the, if you ever want to stir up a room full of surveyors, just ask them, are you guys a trade or a profession? And just watch them go after it. So yeah, there was this kind of split where we saw trades go into the trade school, and we saw the other professions go into the professions, and the surveyors just said, well, we don't really need to get in with either of them. We'll be fine. And here we are. We're getting ready to retire most of our workforce.
And so, Dustin, is surveying a trade or a profession?
I think it has, I lean towards the sides of profession. And the reason is there is a certain amount of education that is needed. Now, not all states require you have a degree to get licensed. Arizona, California, handful. Some still do. I think that there's no harm in getting the education. There's plenty of schools that offer it asynchronous online, which is amazing because most of the people that are doing this are already in the profession. But we do have that trade element. The construction staking and the layout. There's some arguments for topographic surveying being a portion of the trades and less the profession because you're doing less data analysis. But I'm definitely in the profession school.
This is Dr. James Bryant, the coach in your corner. If you're an engineering leader who wants to win at work and at home without burning out in the process, keep listening. Every week, I help my private clients bring order back to their leadership, their schedules, and their lives, not because they're doing anything wrong, but because they've outgrown their old definition of success and they have no idea what to do next. Together, we define what winning actually looks like for this season of their life. We help them build the clarity and confidence and systems that they need to make it real so they can lead with purpose while staying present for the people who matter most. If this is you, then it's time to take the next step. Visit engineeryoursuccessnow.com to schedule your complimentary integrated success strategy call. Let me help you win at work and at home. Does the amount or extent of the liability that you talked about earlier play a role in your choice of trade or profession?
No, I think it's more, it's once you get into that boundary analysis, because you have to consider your independent state's laws. So whatever that says, you have to take into account whose map was filed first, what was what was occupied. And one of the things that I don't think it's discussed enough is some of the people who do, vaguely know surveyors, they say they stake out property lines, and we stake out boundary lines. And so there's a difference. So when a map is filed and a property is set, the boundary and property lines are exactly the same. But over time, that property line may drift, change, depending on occupation. And so I call it our Bible, but it's Brown's boundary law. What that says is boundary is a matter of fact, where property is a matter of law. And you have to kind of take all these things into consideration. And it takes a tremendous amount of learning, but more importantly, it takes a mentor who is willing to sit with you when you were coming up in this profession and train you. And I think fitting with this podcast great is within our licensed community, you have an even smaller amount of mentors who are great leaders and will actually teach you how to approach these and bring you up.
You've mentioned mentoring, being able to equip and influence upcoming leaders, what are some of the leadership principles that you've learned over the years in your work as a surveyor?
I believe that the biggest thing that's helped me is someone asking me, I come to them with a problem and say, hey, this is what I'm looking at. And my mentors would say, okay, well, you've got your stamp, you've got your training. What do you think? And I'll correct you as you go. But it's looking at the people that you've hired and that you've trusted to build your team with, to make decisions and kind of help them say, yeah, nope, that's, 2 out of these 3 points were perfect. But on this one point here, have you ever considered this or looked at it this way? So instead of just coming in and just immediately, nope, that's totally wrong, you're going to mess this up, jumping on them, is giving them their chance to, so to speak, flex their muscle. And then when they fail that final lift, just say, hey, that was a good shot. And I can see where you're coming from with the evidence you've given me. However, this might be a better way of looking at it. And really, at the end of the day, it's wild to say this, but it's true, is when I stamp a survey, it's an opinion. And that's all this is. And this is my opinion based on the best available evidence that I've found working this job. And it's not set in stone. The next guy might come along and say, hey, I found this unrecorded map in this guy's file from, you know, 40 years ago. Did you have this? It's no. And it very well could be that one unrecorded map, which are out there, could completely change my entire opinion. So having someone that can tell you these things and show you how it's done in the real world is, priceless.
Is there some kind of organization or association for surveyors where you guys get together and talk about these kinds of issues?
But yeah. Yep. So we have conferences. I'm mostly in the West, so I don't know too much about back East, but each state will have a state organization, and then they'll usually hold conferences for the young professionals out there. And even if if you don't have your stamp yet, if you're not licensed, if you've been in the profession for 2 days, doesn't matter. Look up and see if your state has something called the Young Surveyors Network. And we have a parent branch that's national, but many states will also have a state chapter, and those are fantastic. Just get involved in everything you can and you'll start meeting people. But the big plus of the Young Surveyors Network is it gets other people that are new to the profession and may not be as experienced, and it'll get you all together, and then you guys will be friends. And you're the summation of the people that you surround yourself with. So if you surround yourself with like-minded professionals, you guys are just going to push each other on your own to move up and train up. And it's, I mean, getting out there and networking at these conferences and these state chapters, it gives you the chance that if you run up against something weird, and I don't know, maybe your mentor's never seen something, and so you can call up one of these people and say, hey, I've got a weird one, can you help me? And 99.9% of the time they're they'll they'll do what they can to help you.
So get involved in the industry organization, the association, and then network and build out your ability to connect with people when you have an issue. Say, hey, have you ever seen something like this? So you're expanding the sphere that you're able to connect to get some advice and I guess general information.
Yeah. Yep. And for those, if anybody's super rural, it happened. I worked for the state of Nebraska, and there is some really rural places out there, and it may be tough to travel. I know it's expensive nowadays. There is an online resource. It's called Mentoring Mondays and Wisdom Wednesdays. And both of those, they're kind of, think of it as like an online conference. There's a backlog of, we're probably close to, if not over 100 of each. And every week they'll bring in a professional and they'll talk about boundary resolution this week, or best scanning practices. So there's a million different things, and you can kind of pick and choose what you want to work on. But there's a lot of information out there. And if you're stuck and hey, I can't find any of this, then you can find me on LinkedIn, and I'm ecstatic to help other people come up, because it is intimidating. the exams that are required and all the information is a lot. And if you don't have that support network and good leaders for it, then it's quite a mountain to tackle.
If there's someone that's listening to this episode and they're listening about surveying, they're listening to your story, what's the one overarching theme that you want them to be able to walk away with in your personal journey in surveying? What do you wish someone told you when you started day one?
For the first question is, don't be afraid to ask questions. It might sound like you're like, oh, they're going to make fun of me. This is a dumb question. Please do not. There is no dumb questions when you're trying to learn. It's complex. We've all asked the exact same questions before. And if you get someone that's just going to rib you for asking questions, then you're not with the right mentor. But the mentors that I've had, I've been incredibly fortunate. If you asked a question in a group setting, they would be fighting over each other to offer help. And that's what you really want that. And that really is something, that I wish that I took into account, because I was in the profession for 4.5, 5 years before I started really making a run for licensing. And there was a lot of stuff that I didn't understand and I was afraid to ask. And because of that, it delayed me moving up to party chief and then delayed me to move up. So really just really ask those questions, and, visualize where you want to be and then go, okay, how do I get there? Because it's going to look, when you're standing at the bottom and you've just started this profession and you're looking at this big stamp and talking to these guys that have been doing it, they're in their 60s and they've been doing it for 30, 40 years. You're like, wow, there's no way I'm ever going to know all that. That's because you're looking at the very top and not the immediate next step right in front of you. So it might be a big staircase, but if you can just take one step at a time by asking that question you think is dumb, you're going to be at the top of that mountain before you know it.
That is great advice, and it can apply to aspiring surveyors, engineers, leaders, managers, people in general, being able to have the courage to ask questions and then to just keep moving, take the information, keep applying it, keep moving forward. What is your definition of winning at work and at home?
That's a good one. Um, Winning at work is having a team that you can trust, that's well rounded out, right? And so one of my things with teams is I'm not hiring people or looking for people to fill and do one thing, and that's the only person that fills and does that one thing. I want that person who can do that one thing really well to come in and share that knowledge, and then we'll give it back. And so a team can refine itself, build itself. As far as winning at home, man, is being able to be home. And I'm thankful that a lot of the firms now, especially the one that I'm at with Diamondback, is they recognize the value of your work-life balance. And they make sure it's like, they want your family to be included in your work. So my wife's not a surveyor. My son's not a surveyor, although he might be. He might be fifth gen, if that's what he wants to do. But they go through great lengths to make sure that the family gets to come in and the families that work together get to kind of, be friends, and socialize together and laugh, because, everyone that works at the firm, when they're out driving through town, go, oh, I mapped that, I built that, I did this. It drives our spouses nuts. So no, it's just that I grew up in a small business, a family business, and I'm working for one now. And yeah, having that inclusion and that family at home and work is great.
Thank you for sharing that. It's been a great discussion. What's the best way for one of our listeners to get in contact with you?
So I'm very responsive on LinkedIn and social media, mostly Instagram. I don't really use Facebook. You could find me Instagram as the_superstitious_surveyor. So I have, I've been doing, and this is one of those things that I just stumbled into, but I've been doing folklore regarding land surveying and, going back 5,000 years. There's been some buildup of it. So I respond to questions a lot on there. You can find me on LinkedIn, just Dustin Gardner, and I'm happy to respond both ways. And if there's any civil firms or architect firms and they're like, hey, we keep seeing this from surveyors, why are you doing this? Or what is this? Or hey, we'd really appreciate it if we saw this more out of surveyors, then we'd like to. We want to open up that conversation between these parallel professions, because I want my work life to go great. I want the deliverable that I give you to work great. So I definitely hope that people do reach out and we can open up some conversation.
That'll be great. We will include a link to your LinkedIn profile as well as your Instagram profile in the show notes. And so now you have me really, like curious. So what's one of the more interesting folklore points that you've come across in your surveying folklore?
So the first one and my favorite is in the first chapter of our Bible, the Boundary Law book. It makes note of a church in Devon. And the way that they used to monument churches is they would take these big stone squares and chisel crosses into them. And that serves two purposes. One, for us as surveyors, we still use this, the chiseled X or chiseled cross. That's a very specific retraceable point. And so it makes it easier for us when we have to go and retrace these boundaries, we can lay it out. The second purpose of that is more religious in nature. That chiseled cross was what we would call an apotropaic, which is like a preventative magic. And if you read Paul Barber's Vampires, Burial, and Death, as you would, just light reading, he makes note of a specific type of vampire called the boundary pusher, which is has to be one of the most interesting explanations for why my monuments aren't where they're supposed to be. But yeah, so the idea is because there's these crosses at the corners of this property that these vampires can't cross the line. And to these people, look, for us looking back, you're like, wow, that's weird. But to the people at the time, that was a very real threat. And one of the things that kind of trailed off with vampires at the start of Bram Stoker's Dracula, which is kind of framed how we see them now. Before that, they were seen as endemic creatures. So if there was a big sickness that was floating around town, that was the cause of it. And so if you look at something like COVID, if we were looking at that through a 11th or 12th century lens, everyone would have been carrying around garlic and steaks. So no, we found ourselves in a lot of interesting things, and usually if you look at something that's chaotic, you'll find a surveyor involved somehow. So
That is interesting. Thanks for sharing. So before we close out the interview, I like to switch things around, and I will give you the ability to become the interviewer. I am the interviewee. What's one question that you'd like to ask me?
so I am I am really introverted. Don't like to put myself out there. I'm happy to help, but I don't usually throw myself out, and I know for a fact that we have really good, really capable, intelligent surveyors that are very shy. How do I convince them that you can be a huge leader in this industry? You just have to be comfortable breaking out of your shell.
One is, I don't know if you convince them as much as you talk about the impact of what them sharing their story or sharing their point of view can have on other people. So you make it a little less about them and being in their shell. You can acknowledge that some of the best leaders that we have in the world are introverts. It's not about being an extrovert. It is about being able to leverage your story, to be able to leverage what it is that you have to say and package it in a way that other people may be able to benefit from that.
Never really thought of it that way. That was I kind of, mine was kind of a voluntold. I got offered to help with something, and then it led from one thing to the next, and here I am. But there's still sometimes where you're getting into situations where you're like, wow, I'm really uncomfortable.
Many of us get into situations where we're uncomfortable, where we are pushing past the boundaries that we've set for ourselves. Now, those boundaries are real because we set them, right? If I said that I can only do this and that's what my mindset is, then that's going to be my boundary. If my boundary is beyond that, then it allows more room for me to express myself in a different way. You know, you are bound by what you define. Well, listen, I really appreciate you taking the time to talk to me today, especially now knowing that you're an introvert and don't like putting yourself out there. I think you did a great job of just showing up and being yourself.
Thanks for having me again.
This is Dr. James Bryant, the coach in your corner. One thing that stood out to me in this conversation is how much surveying and leadership comes down to boundaries. Not just physical boundaries, but the ones we define ourselves. We talked about how boundary lines are defined through judgment, using the best available evidence, and how once they're set, they just don't hold the surveyor accountable. They affect everyone who has to live, build, or make decisions within them. And it brings me back to this idea. You are bound by what you define. If you define yourself as not ready, you'll never be ready. If you define yourself as not a leader, then you'll always follow, even when you don't want to. If you define the next step as too big or too uncomfortable, that becomes your boundary and you stay exactly where you are. And sometimes the boundary we accept is how we define success. If you define success as winning at work or home, then you'll never enjoy the fulfillment that comes from winning at both. Unlike boundaries in surveying, you don't have to go to court or dig through the county records to change these. You can redefine your boundaries right now. What boundaries have you accepted simply because you defined them that way? You can change, and I want you to be great this week.
You keep hitting the same walls with your team, your workload, your life.
You know what they say about insanity? Doing the same thing over and over again, expecting different results?
Are you ready to break the cycle? Engineer Your Success. Insiders is Dr. James Bryant's private podcast. It's like having a coach in your corner focused on helping you win at work and home.
One story, one insight, one action to help you focus on what matters most.
Join at engineeryoursuccessnow.com/insiders.